Andre Williams felt his heart kick hard against his ribs as the cruiser rolled to a stop beside him, tires whispering over wet pavement. He hadn't been running, he hadn't been hiding, he was just walking home with his hood up against the cold, phone buzzing in his pocket with a text he hadn't checked yet. The driver's door opened, slow and deliberate, and a voice he didn't recognize sliced the air. "Hey, you! Stop right there." In that instant, the ordinary night fractured, and something heavier, older, familiar settled into Andre's chest, the knowledge that this moment could turn into something he couldn't control. Officer Daniel Brooks had been on patrol long enough to trust his instincts, or at least that's what he told himself as he stepped out of the cruiser, hand resting near his belt, eyes fixed on the teenager in the hoodie. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every movement feel louder than it was, and Brooks's radio crackled faintly with distant calls that didn't concern him. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, tone flat but edged, as if the answer might confirm a suspicion already formed. Andre stopped, hands visible, shoulders tight. "Walking home," he said, voice steady though his pulse wasn't. Brooks scanned him from head to toe, lingering on the hood, the worn sneakers, the way Andre's eyes flicked briefly toward the cruiser before returning to the officer's face. "You live around here?" Brooks pressed. "Yes, sir, 2 blocks that way," Andre replied, nodding toward the row of houses behind him. The officer's jaw tightened. He asked for ID. Andre reached slowly, every movement careful, and handed over his wallet. Brooks glanced at the card, then back at Andre, something unreadable crossing his face. "We've had reports of break-ins," Brooks said, though there had been none on his shift. "You fit the description." Andre frowned. "What description?" he asked, unable to keep the edge out of his voice. That was when Brooks's posture changed, authority hardening into something colder. "Don't get smart with me," he snapped, stepping closer. Passers-by were scarce. A porch light flicked on somewhere down the block, then off again. Brooks told Andre to turn around. The click of the cuffs was louder than Andre expected, metal biting into his wrists as disbelief surged into anger, then into a quiet fear he refused to show. "I didn't do anything," Andre said. Words meant as much for himself as for the officer. Brooks guided him toward the cruiser, the night suddenly crowded with tension, neither of them aware that a single name on a plastic card was about to change everything. The back seat of the cruiser felt smaller than Andre expected, molded plastic pressing against his shoulders as Officer Brooks closed the door with a firm, final thud that echoed down the block. The world outside the window warped through streaks of rain and reflected lights, familiar houses suddenly distant, unreachable. Brooks slid into the driver's seat, exhaled once, and glanced at the ID resting on the console as if it were an afterthought, rather than the reason this stop had escalated. Andre watched him through the metal mesh, jaw clenched, replaying every second in his head, wondering where the night had gone wrong. "You know why I stopped you," Brooks said without looking back, tapping the card with one finger. "You were loitering." Andre let out a short, incredulous laugh before he could stop himself. "I was walking," he said, "same way I do every night." Brooks's eyes flicked up to the rearview mirror, sharp and warning. "Careful," he said. The cruiser pulled away from the curb, tires hissing over wet asphalt, and Andre's stomach dropped as the houses slid past, each one a missed chance to call out, to be seen. He thought about his brother, Robert, about the way people straightened when they heard his name, the way his presence filled a room without effort. Andre had grown up in that shadow, proud of it but wary too, determined to make his own way without leaning on a badge he hadn't earned. Now, with his wrists aching and his phone vibrating uselessly in his pocket, he wondered if that pride had been a mistake. Brooks radioed in, voice clipped, reporting a detained suspect for questioning. The word suspect landed hard. Andre leaned forward as much as the cuffs allowed. "Officer, can I at least call my family?" he asked. Brooks hesitated, fingers tightening on the steering wheel, then shook his head. "After we clear a few things up," he said.
The station loomed ahead, lights glowing through the rain, and Andre felt a surge of anger push back against the fear. He stared at the back of Brooks's head, memorizing the shape of it, the way authority looked when it didn't bother to explain itself. Neither of them spoke again as the cruiser rolled into the lot, rain drumming steadily on the roof, the tension between them thick enough to taste. The station smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, a sharp, institutional mix that made Andre's nose wrinkle as Officer Brooks guided him through the side entrance, one hand firm on his arm, the other holding the cuffs just tight enough to remind him who was in control. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flattening everything into harsh clarity, and Andre caught fragments of conversation as they passed open desks. Complaints about paperwork, a joke cut short, the low murmur of a phone call. Heads turned. Some lingered, curious. Others slid away quickly, practiced at not seeing too much. Brooks stopped at a metal bench near the processing area and motioned for Andre to sit. "Stay," he said, as if Andre had anywhere else to go. As Brooks stepped away to speak with the desk sergeant, Andre shifted on the bench, cuffs biting into his skin, and let his gaze wander. He noticed the framed commendations on the wall, the faded poster about community trust, the way the clock above the door seemed to tick louder than it should. Sergeant Emily Harris glanced over from the counter, her expression neutral but assessing. "What do we have?" she asked Brooks quietly, though not quietly enough. "Suspicious individual, possible connection to recent break-ins." Harris raised an eyebrow. "We've had no break-ins tonight," she said, voice calm but firm. Brooks stiffened. "He was loitering," he repeated. Harris's eyes flicked to Andre, taking in his age, his posture, the way he met her gaze without flinching. "Name?" she asked. Brooks handed over the ID. Harris read it once, then again, her brow creasing almost imperceptibly. Andre watched her reaction closely, feeling something shift in the air, though he couldn't name it yet. "You mind if I ask why I'm being held?" Andre said, breaking the silence. Harris looked at him fully now. "We're just sorting things out," she said. "Sit tight." Brooks returned, arms crossed, as Harris typed into the computer. The clatter of keys filled the space between them. Andre felt the weight of the room press in, every second stretching. He thought again of his brother, of the last time Robert had warned him about nights like this, about how quickly a routine stop could become something else. Harris's typing slowed, then stopped. She stared at the screen, then at the ID in her hand, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Brooks," she said quietly, "when did you say you ran this name?" Brooks turned, irritation flashing. "Just now," he said. Harris's gaze didn't waver. "You might want to take another look," she replied. The hum of the lights seemed to grow louder as Brooks stepped closer, peering over her shoulder, unaware that the ground beneath his certainty was about to give way. Officer Brooks leaned in toward the computer screen, expecting at most a minor correction, maybe a flag he'd missed. But instead, he felt his stomach tighten as the name stared back at him in stark black letters, Andre Williams. Beneath it, a neatly aligned line of information followed, including an emergency contact listed not as a parent or guardian, but as Chief Robert Williams. Brooks blinked once, then again, as if the screen might change if he gave it enough time. "That can't be right," he muttered, half to himself. Sergeant Harris watched him closely, her expression carefully controlled. "It is," she said. "Same last name, same address on file for next of kin. Want me to keep digging?" Brooks straightened abruptly, heat crawling up his neck. He glanced over at Andre, who sat quietly on the bench, shoulders squared, eyes steady, as if he'd already sensed the shift. The room seemed to contract, every sound sharpening, the ring of a phone, the squeak of a chair, the low buzz of the lights. Brooks lowered his voice. "You didn't say anything about being related to the chief," he said, an edge of accusation slipping through. Andre met his gaze evenly. "You didn't ask," he replied. The simplicity of the answer landed harder than any insult. Harris cleared her throat. "Procedure says we notify a guardian," she said, choosing her words carefully. "In this case," she let the sentence hang. Brooks ran a hand over his face, the confidence he'd carried in from the street now cracked, uncertainty seeping in. He imagined the call, explaining an arrest that wasn't an arrest, just a misunderstanding, maybe. He imagined the chief's voice on the other end of the line, calm but unmistakably disappointed. Brooks had crossed paths with Chief Williams before, had seen the respect he commanded without raising his voice. The thought of that man walking into the station, eyes scanning the room, made Brooks's chest tighten. Andre shifted on the bench, the metal cuffs clinging softly. "Am I being charged with something?" he asked. Harris looked to Brooks, giving him the chance to answer. Brooks hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet," he said. The words sounded thin, even to him. Outside the processing area, footsteps approached, measured, purposeful, and Harris glanced up. "That'll be him," she said quietly, and Brooks felt the full weight of the night settle onto his shoulders as the reality of what he'd set in motion finally sank in. The footsteps grew louder, echoing down the hallway with a rhythm that carried authority long before the man himself came into view. Chief Robert Williams appeared at the doorway, coat still damp from the rain, his presence instantly changing the temperature of the room. Conversations faltered, chairs stilled. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade as officers straightened without thinking, years of habit kicking in. Robert's eyes swept the space once, efficiently, before landing on Andre, seated on the bench, hands cuffed, jaw set in a way that told his brother everything without a word being spoken. For a brief moment, something personal flickered across Robert's face, concern, anger, restraint, but it vanished just as quickly, replaced by the composed calm that had earned him his position. "Why is my brother in handcuffs?" he asked, voice even, not raised, yet carrying clearly across the room. Officer Brooks swallowed and stepped forward. "Sir, I detained him for questioning," he said, choosing each word carefully now. He matched the description of a suspect in the area. Robert's gaze shifted to Brooks, sharp but controlled. "What description?" he asked. Brooks hesitated. "A young male in a hoodie," he said, the words sounding hollow as soon as they left his mouth. Sergeant Harris interjected gently. "There were no active break-in reports tonight, Chief." Robert nodded once, absorbing that, then looked back at Andre. "You okay?" he asked. Andre lifted his cuffed hands slightly. "I'd be better without these," he said quietly. A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. Robert turned back to Brooks. "Remove the cuffs," he said. It wasn't a request. Brooks complied immediately, the click of the metal opening sounding unnaturally loud as he stepped back. Andre rubbed his wrists, flexing his fingers, and stood, meeting his brother's eyes. "I was walking home," he said simply. Robert listened, then turned again to Brooks. "We'll talk," he said, tone measured, promising nothing yet implying everything. He placed a hand lightly on Andre's shoulder, a gesture both grounding and protective, before guiding him away from the bench. As they moved toward Robert's office, whispers began to ripple behind them, speculation, judgment, unease, while Brooks remained where he was, staring at the empty cuffs in his hand, realizing that the night was far from over and that this encounter would not be quietly forgotten. Inside the chief's office, the door closed with a muted click that shut out the noise of the station, but not the weight of what had just happened. The room was orderly, almost spare, bookshelves lined with policy manuals and framed photographs, a flag in the corner, a desk cleared to the essentials. Chief Robert Williams gestured for Andre to sit, then remained standing himself, hands braced on the edge of the desk as if grounding his thoughts before speaking. "Tell me exactly how it started," he said, voice calm but intent. Andre took a breath and laid it out from the beginning. The lights, the questions, the cuffs, the way the stop had shifted from routine to something colder without warning. He didn't embellish, he didn't soften it either. Robert listened without interruption, his face unreadable, eyes occasionally flicking to the faint red marks still visible on Andre's wrists. When Andre finished, silence settled between them, thick and deliberate. "I didn't call you," Andre said, finally, meeting his brother's gaze. "I know," Robert replied. "You shouldn't have had to." He straightened, the decision forming behind his eyes. "This doesn't disappear because of who I am," he added, more to himself than to Andre. A knock sounded at the door. "Come in," Robert said. Sergeant Harris stepped inside, posture professional. "Officer Brooks is waiting," she said. Robert nodded. "Give us a minute." After she left, Robert placed a hand on Andre's shoulder again. "You're free to go home," he said, "but I may ask you to make a statement later." Andre stood. "I will," he said, "not because you're my brother, because it shouldn't happen to anyone." Robert's mouth tightened, pride and concern mingling. Outside, Brooks waited stiffly near the desk, eyes forward. Robert emerged alone. "Walk with me," he said. They moved down the corridor, past officers pretending not to listen. In a quiet alcove, Robert stopped. "You detained my brother without cause," he said evenly. "Explain." Brooks swallowed, words tumbling out. Instincts, training, the neighborhood. Robert let him finish. "Instincts are not evidence," he said, "and training exists to check bias, not excuse it." Brooks nodded, shame creeping into his expression. "This will be reviewed, fully." He paused, then added, "Not because it was my brother, because it was wrong." As Robert walked away, Brooks stood rooted in place, understanding that the badge on his chest suddenly felt heavier than it ever had before. By morning, the rain had cleared, but the tension from the night before lingered like humidity in the air. Andre woke up on his couch, clothes still folded neatly over a chair, the events replaying in his mind with an unwelcome clarity. His phone was full of missed notifications, texts from friends who'd heard something through the neighborhood grapevine, a voicemail from his mother's church friend asking if he was all right now. He scrolled past them, not ready to answer, and stared out the window as the city came back to life. Across town, Officer Brooks sat in his kitchen nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, the station's internal affairs notice open on the table beside him. The words were clinical, impersonal, but they cut deep. Pending review, administrative leave. He thought about the moment he'd seen the name on the screen, how the ground had shifted beneath him, and how easily it could have stayed solid if the ID had belonged to someone else. Back at the station, Chief Williams convened a small meeting with Sergeant Harris and two senior supervisors. He didn't raise his voice or grandstand. He laid out the facts, the body cam footage, the absence of probable cause. "We owe the public transparency," he said, "and we owe ourselves honesty." Harris nodded, appreciative but wary of the backlash that would come. Meanwhile, word spread beyond the station. A neighbor had filmed part of the arrest from a porch across the street, shaky footage of blue lights and a young man being handcuffed. By noon, it was circulating online, stripped of context but heavy with implication. Andre watched it on his phone, heart sinking as comments scrolled by, some outraged, others dismissive, a few cruelly familiar. He closed the app, jaw tightening. That afternoon, Robert stopped by Andre's place, not as chief, but as a brother. They sat in silence for a while. "You didn't deserve that," Robert said finally. Andre nodded. "I know. That's what scares me." Outside, sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, ordinary and ominous at once, as both men understood that the story had moved beyond a single night and into something the city would have to confront. The press conference was scheduled for late afternoon, the timing deliberate, and the room filled quickly with reporters, cameras clicking as Chief Robert Williams stepped up to the podium with a controlled steadiness that masked the strain behind his eyes. Andre watched from the back, half hidden near a column, feeling exposed despite the anonymity of the crowd. Robert addressed the facts without embellishment, acknowledging the stop, the detention, the review process underway, and the decision to place Officer Brooks on administrative leave pending investigation. He refused to take questions about family, repeating calmly that the case would be handled the same, regardless of names. Still, Andre felt every camera lens searching for him, felt the weight of recognition press in as whispers moved through the room. When the conference ended, he slipped out into the hallway, the echo of Robert's voice still ringing in his ears. Outside, the city buzzed, sirens, traffic, the low murmur of people who had opinions now, who felt entitled to them. Andre walked, needing movement, passing a mural half-finished on a brick wall, its colors bright and unresolved. His phone rang. It was Officer Brooks. Andre considered letting it go, but answered. Brooks's voice was hesitant, stripped of authority. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I just wanted you to hear this from me. I was wrong." Andre stopped walking, gripping the phone. He listened, saying nothing, as Brooks stumbled through an apology that sounded practiced and raw at the same time. When Brooks finished, Andre spoke quietly. "You didn't see me," he said. "You saw a threat." The line went silent for a beat. "I know," Brooks replied. Andre hung up without another word. That evening, Andre met friends at a diner that smelled of grease and coffee, a place where the booths were cracked and familiar. Conversations circled the incident, then drifted away, laughter breaking through in brief, necessary bursts. Across town, Brooks sat alone in his car, watching the sun dip behind the skyline, replaying the call and the body cam footage, seeing himself from angles he'd never considered. At home, Robert reviewed policy drafts late into the night, red pens scratching quietly, aware that each decision would be scrutinized, that the space between personal and professional had narrowed to a thin, unforgiving line. The city moved around them all, restless and awake, carrying the story forward whether they were ready or not. The internal affairs interview room was smaller than Officer Brooks remembered, its plain walls and bolted tables stripping away any illusion of rank or routine as he took his seat across from two investigators he'd once joked with in the break room. A recorder blinked red, capturing every word, every pause. Brooks spoke carefully at first, leaning on procedure and training, but the questions tightened, circling the moment he decided to stop Andre, the absence of a call, the leap from observation to cuffs. With each answer, the justifications thinned until what remained was discomfort he couldn't deflect. Across town, Andre sat at his kitchen table filling out a written statement, his handwriting steady despite the memories threading back through him. He described the sound of the cuffs, the pressure of the officer's hand, the way the night had felt suddenly hostile. He didn't mention his brother until the form required it. When he finished, he stared at the page, surprised by how heavy honesty could feel. Chief Williams spent the day moving between meetings, balancing union representatives, community leaders, and city officials, refusing shortcuts even as pressure mounted. Some wanted a swift, quiet resolution. Others wanted a public reckoning. He listened, asked questions, and kept the process intact, knowing any deviation would undermine everything he stood for. Outside the station, a small crowd gathered with signs that demanded accountability and dignity, their voices rising and falling in uneven waves. Andre passed them on his way home, catching fragments of chants that sounded both supportive and exhausting. A woman recognized him and nodded, eyes kind but curious, and Andre returned the gesture before moving on, aware of how quickly a person could become a symbol. That evening, Brooks received the formal notice outlining potential disciplinary outcomes. He set it down on the counter and looked at his reflection in the darkened window, seeing not a villain or a hero, but a man confronted with consequences he could no longer outrun. As night fell, the city seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a conclusion that no one could yet name. The decision came quietly, without ceremony, delivered in a memo that circulated through the department before it ever reached the news. Officer Daniel Brooks would be suspended without pay, required to complete remedial training, and reassigned pending further evaluation, a conclusion that satisfied no one completely and therefore felt, to Chief Williams, uncomfortably honest. Brooks read the notice in his apartment, the city's late afternoon light slanting across the floor, and folded it once before setting it down, the weight of it settling into his chest as something permanent rather than punitive. He thought about the night again, not the outcome, but the beginning, and understood that the memory would follow him longer than the discipline. Andre learned the result from his brother over dinner, the two of them sitting at a small table while the city hummed beyond the windows. He listened, nodding, neither relieved nor angry, just aware that the story had reached a point where it no longer belonged solely to him. Later, he walked the same route home he'd taken that night, hood down now, hands in his pockets, the sidewalk unchanged, and yet entirely different. A patrol car passed without slowing, then another, their presence ordinary again, and Andre felt the tension ease from his shoulders in increments. At the station, Chief Williams lingered after hours, reviewing reports, pausing at a community trust poster he hadn't noticed in years, its edges curling slightly. He straightened it without thinking. Somewhere across town, Brooks drove with the radio off, the streets familiar but newly sharp, each intersection a reminder of choice. Andre reached his front steps and stopped, looking back once at the stretch of road where the lights had flared and faded, then went inside, closing the door softly behind him. The city continued on, imperfect, unresolved, alive, holding within it the echo of a night that had changed 3 lives in ways that would unfold quietly long after the cameras moved on.